My name is Elena Vargas. At 24 years old, I never imagined I would have to prove that my own brother tried to cause my downfall. I have had type 1 diabetes since I was 12. For 12 years I had managed my condition perfectly until last month when a so-called harmless prank from my brother nearly ended everything. The morning began like any other. I checked my sugar levels, prepared my insulin and headed to work at the local library where I had recently been promoted to head librarian. My brother Alejandro Castillo still lived at home with our parents at 26 while he worked part-time at a video game store trying to find his direction. That day he showed an unusual interest in my routine. "Hey sis, still poking yourself with those needles?" he joked while watching me prepare my insulin. I ignored him, accustomed to his immature comments. I did not notice how he followed every movement with his eyes or how he lingered near my diabetes supplies. Later during my lunch break I followed my usual routine, checking my sugar, calculating the dose and injecting myself. Less than an hour later something felt terribly wrong. My hands began to shake. My vision blurred and sweat poured down my forehead. These were classic signs of low blood sugar, but this felt different. More intense and much faster. I checked my levels again. The reading was dangerously low, which made no sense given how careful I had been. I reached for my glucose tablets, but the symptoms progressed far quicker than normal. The last thing I remember is my colleague's voice calling for emergency help as I collapsed behind the reference desk. I woke up in the hospital with the constant beeping of monitors filling the room. My parents were there. Mom was crying. Dad looked serious and Alejandro stood in the corner with an expression I could not read. "It was just an accident," Mom kept repeating while stroking my hand. "Your brother only wanted to help you. He was organizing your insulin pens. He must have switched them by mistake." Switched them. I tried to focus through the fog in my mind. Alejandro spoke in a too casual voice. "Yeah, sorry sis. I noticed your pens weren't properly labeled, so I wanted to sort them out. I must have mixed up the fast-acting and the long-acting insulin. My bad." He laughed. Something in his tone sent chills down my spine. I had managed my diabetes for 12 years. My pens were always clearly labeled and stored separately. I never mixed them up. Never. It was an honest mistake. Mom insisted. "You have to forgive your brother, Elena. Family is everything." But as I lay there, the memories began to return. Alejandro watching me that morning. His unusual interest in my routine. The questions he had asked about my insulin types over the past week. "I want to see the security footage," I said quietly. "What?" Mom blinked in confusion. The library had installed new cameras the previous month, including in the break room where I kept my things during my shift. "I want to see the recordings." Alejandro's face changed for a split second before he regained control. "Come on sis, don't be paranoid. I already said I'm sorry." But I saw it. That flash of panic in his eyes. Dad saw it too because he suddenly sat up alert. "I'll call the library," Dad said, ignoring Mom's protests about family trust. Alejandro made an excuse and left quickly, saying he had to get to work. Mom followed, probably to comfort him over my accusations. Dad stayed looking worried. "Elena," he said slowly. "Has something like this happened before?" I hesitated, then told him about the glucose tablets that had disappeared the week before and the time my insulin seemed ineffective. As I described how Alejandro had been strangely focused on my condition lately, Dad's expression grew darker with every word. He took out his phone and made another call. This time not to the library. "Yes, Officer Thompson. This is George Castillo. I need to report a possible attempt on my daughter's life." The next 48 hours became a whirlwind of police interviews and medical tests. The hospital analyzed my insulin pens and found alarming inconsistencies in their concentrations. Someone had been tampering with them, diluting some and concentrating others to dangerous levels. Detective Sarah Martinez sat beside my bed with her notebook ready. "Tell me about your relationship with your brother," she said, studying my face. Before I could answer, Mom burst into the room. "This is ridiculous. Alejandro would never hurt Elena. They have always been so close." Close. I thought about the past few years. Alejandro's growing resentment as I advanced in my career while he achieved nothing. His comments about my comfortable little job at the library. The time he sabotaged my interview at his store by telling the manager I was unstable because of my diabetes. Mrs. Castillo. The detective said coldly, "Please wait outside." When Mom left, I told her everything. The strange incidents. Alejandro's odd behavior. His suspicious interest in my condition. "We have the recordings," she said, pulling out a tablet. "Ready to watch them?" The video was clear. It showed Alejandro entering the break room during my shift using the spare key he had taken from Mom's purse under the excuse of dropping off lunch. He walked straight to my supply bag, swapped the insulin pens and carefully adjusted their contents with precise movements. No hesitation, no confusion. He knew exactly what he was doing. "There's more," the detective said. The second video showed him replacing my glucose tablets with similar-looking candies. The lab confirmed they were just mints. I felt sick. Why? Why would he do this? The answer came from an unexpected source. My colleague who had called for help had noticed strange things. Alejandro hanging around the library more often, asking about my schedule, and most importantly, she had overheard him on the phone in the parking lot 2 weeks earlier. "The policy pays double for accidental death," he had said. And with her condition, who would question it? I remembered then the life insurance policy our grandparents had set up for us at birth. Mine was worth more because of my diabetes, intended to help with medical costs. Alejandro had recently asked about that policy, claiming he was worried about my financial security. The evidence was overwhelming, but Mom refused to believe it. "There must be an explanation," she insisted. "Alejandro is a good boy. Elena must have mishandled her insulin." Dad, however, had finally seen the truth. He found Alejandro's laptop at home and discovered searches about insulin overdose, death from low blood sugar, and life insurance claims. There were also emails with street lenders. Alejandro was deeply in debt from online gambling. "I enabled him for too long," Dad said, his voice breaking. "I always made excuses for his behavior and his lack of responsibility. I never thought he would go this far." The police arrested Alejandro at the video game store. He did not even try to deny it when confronted with the evidence. He just laughed the same way he had in the hospital. "She was always the perfect one," he spat. "Perfect grades, perfect job, perfect daughter. Even her illness got her more attention. Do you know what it's like living in her shadow?" His words echoed in my head that night as I lay in my hospital room, still recovering from what my own brother had tried to do to me. Mom had not returned since the arrest, unable to face the truth. Dad stayed strong, as if trying to make up for years of not seeing who Alejandro really was. Detective Martinez visited again to update me on the investigation. They had found more tampered insulin at the house and evidence that Alejandro had been planning this for months. He had even participated in online forums seeking advice on how to make a death look accidental. "He will be charged with attempted harm," she told me, plus conspiracy to commit insurance fraud and tampering with medical supplies. "Given the premeditation and the evidence, he is facing a long time in prison." I should have felt relieved, but instead I felt empty. My brother had tried to harm me for money. My mother could not accept the truth, and my diabetes, something I had controlled perfectly for 12 years, had been turned into a weapon against me. The library sent flowers and a card signed by the entire staff. My colleague visited every day, bringing books and quiet support. But what surprised me most was Dad's transformation. He went from being Alejandro's biggest defender to my fiercest protector, making sure all my medical supplies were kept in a locked cabinet with surveillance cameras. When I was preparing to be discharged, I knew this was not over. Alejandro's trial was coming, and I would have to face Mom's denial, but for now I was alive and the truth had finally come to light. 6 months after the arrest, I sat in court watching my brother plead guilty to attempted harm. He looked different now, thinner and pale. His usual smirk replaced by a hard expression. Mom sat on the other side of the room, unable to sit with me, still clinging to her denial despite all the evidence. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, "the premeditation in this case is chilling. The defendant spent months researching how to manipulate his sister's medical condition to cause her death. He saw her diabetes not as a condition to be managed but as a weapon he could exploit. The defense tried to paint it as a cry for help, claiming gambling addiction and depression, but the evidence told another story. The judge read online messages from Alejandro. Perfect plan. She never checks the concentrations. Just follows her routine. An insulin mix-up, and no one questions the death of a diabetic. I saw Mom flinch at those words. Perhaps she was finally facing the truth about her son. Dad squeezed my hand firmly and protectively, as he had been since that day in the hospital. The sentence was harsh. 15 years for the attempt plus additional time for the conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. As they led Alejandro away, he turned to look at me one last time, without remorse, without apology, just that cold stare I had seen on the security cameras. "Elena," he said, "you always took everything too seriously. It was just a joke that got out of hand." A joke. My life meant so little to him. Outside reporters waited with questions about the case of the insulin incident. Dad shielded me from the cameras while my colleague who had testified about Alejandro's behavior at the library helped me into the car. That afternoon, unexpectedly, Mom came to my apartment. She looked older and exhausted, as if the weight of reality had finally hit her. "I found this," she said, placing a box on the table. Inside were photos from our childhood. Alejandro and me playing, celebrating birthdays, seemingly happy siblings. "I've been looking at them for hours," she whispered, trying to understand when it changed. "When my son became someone capable of." She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. "I'm sorry, Elena," she said, finally looking at me truly for the first time since everything began. "I was so desperate to believe in his innocence that I forgot to protect you." What kind of mother does that? We talked for hours. We really talked about how Marcus's small cruelties had always been excused as sibling things. How his resentment had grown unchecked. How we had all seen the signs but chosen to ignore them. Life began to take a new shape around this reality. The library promoted me to regional supervisor, partly because of how I handled the media attention from the case. My story sparked important conversations about medical vulnerability and family betrayal. Support groups invited me to share my experience with others who had suffered betrayal within their own families. Dad and I grew closer than ever. He turned his guilt into action, helping me create a foundation for diabetic patients facing manipulation or medical abuse. We called it Trust Your Numbers, inspired by how my glucose readings had been the first sign that something was wrong. Mom started therapy, working through her feelings and her role in allowing Alejandro's behavior. Sometimes she joined Dad and me for dinner. Our family smaller now but more honest than ever. 1 year after the incident, I stood in front of a medical conference telling my story to healthcare professionals and safety experts. The protocols created after my case had already helped identify 3 similar situations. "Trust your instincts," I told them. "When something feels wrong, even if it is family. Especially if it is family. Pay attention." My colleague, now my best friend, sat in the front row smiling proudly. She had been promoted to head librarian, taking my old position. Together we started a mystery medical book club, finding healing in fiction after living our own real drama. At the end of my speech, I touched the medical bracelet on my wrist, now equipped with tamper-proof seals and digital monitoring. Alejandro had tried to turn my condition into my weakness, but it had become my strength. My purpose. Helping others protect themselves. My life would never be the same again, but perhaps it was meant to be this way. Sometimes the most painful betrayals teach us the most important lessons about trust, vigilance, and the value of fighting for our own survival. Thank you for listening to today's story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. See you in the next story.